Dozens of House Republicans are at the southern border in Eagle Pass, Texas. Their trip coming as Customs and Border Patrol saw record high numbers of illegal crossings in December, around 300,000 of them. That is roughly the size of the city of Orlando crossing into the United States illegally in one single month. NTD's congressional correspondent Melina Wisecup reports. So, Melina, Republicans have been down to the border multiple times during this session. Speaker Mike Johnson spoke just a few hours ago. What message are Republicans trying to send with this trip?
So yeah, Steve, you're right. Republicans have went down to the border multiple times. This is the first time, however, that Mike Johnson has led a delegation as speaker. And their point here is really to put more pressure on the Biden administration to make strong changes to border policy. Some of those demands include returning to Trump-era policies like the Remain in Mexico policy. So Speaker Johnson, he led that delegation today of around 64 lawmakers from around 26 states. They met with Border Patrol agents, local residents. They saw processing centers there to really get a grip of the current situation at the border. And here's what they had to say about the urgency of the issue and why their demands deserve to be met. Take a look.
Last month alone, we saw the most illegal crossings in recorded history. And what's more tragic is that it's a disaster of the president's own design.
The greatest domestic threat to the national security and the safety of the American people is Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Well, our committee has finished its 5-phase investigation. You're going to see a lot more coming here very soon.
And that last person you just heard from was Congressman Mark Green. He's the chairman on the Homeland Security Committee here. He says that next week his committee will officially begin those impeachment proceedings against DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, arguing that he has failed to uphold his duty to secure the border. But the DHS Secretary has pushed back, saying he simply doesn't have the money or the resources to 100% carry out his job effectively, saying that the ball is now in Congress's court. Take a look at what he had to say.
We need additional personnel to advance our security at the border. We need technology to advance our fight against fentanyl. We need additional asylum officers to really accelerate the asylum adjudication process.
Republicans, however, argue, Steve, that if the Biden administration were to get more money sent to the DHS, they would simply use that money to process more illegal immigrants and release them into the country rather than trying to use that money to secure the border to begin with. Republicans also argue that there are laws that are already on the books to stop this crisis that the Biden administration right now is refusing to enforce. Steve?
So, Melina, this trip also comes as the White House and the Senate are actively trying to hash out a deal on making changes to border policy. So how are those negotiations shaping up at the moment?
Well, at this point, it's really unclear, Steve, and that's for a couple of reasons. But the major one is because House Republicans, look, even if Senate Republicans, Senate Democrats, and the White House can come to a common ground solution to find some, common ground solutions for border policy and immigration, it's still unclear what House Republicans will be willing to accept. Like I mentioned, they want to return to Trump-era policies, and Senate Leader Chuck Schumer earlier today said the only way forward here is for a compromise from House Republicans on this, but at this point, Steve, it's unclear if they're willing to compromise.
NTD's congressional correspondent reporting live from Capitol Hill, Melina Wisecup, thank you so much. And one example of how hyper-partisan the border issue has become is the battle between the Biden administration and the state of Texas. They're arguing over whether Texas can keep the razor wire fences that they put up to stem the flow of illegal crossings. The Biden administration wants the state to take down the fencing and has asked the Supreme Court to now get involved. The Justice Department also threatening legal action if Texas enforces a law that allows state police to arrest people suspected of crossing the border illegally. The border crisis is a major policy issue heading into the elections this November, no doubt. But how do candidates plan to address it? Joining us now to share his approach, we have Abe Hamad, who's running for Congress in Arizona's 8th District. Abe Hamad, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
Of course, Abe, Right off the bat, why is border protection such a partisan issue, and what might result from Speaker Mike Johnson and 50 Republican, members of Congress visiting the border today?
Well, I think it's a really good sign that the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives is taking it very seriously. Having that border tour just today is going to be really impactful because we know that a government shutdown is looming. And I think so many people now across the country, and you're even seeing Democrats waking up to this now. Look at Chicago's mayor and New York City's mayor. I mean, they're appalled by the amount of migrants coming in, even though that they are sanctuary cities. So it's really interesting to see how the Democrats are trying to unpretzel themselves because the policies that they've promoted have encouraged this mass illegal immigration invasion into our country. But it's really odd because if you look at what's going on our border, it should be a nonpartisan issue. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is that Republicans are the only ones talking about it and to want to actually do something. But Democrats right now, I think they're having a very difficult time. They're looking at the polling. Polling seems to be driving their policy decisions, unfortunately. But hopefully the Republicans now, I think we have a backbone and there's a lot of courage in Congress. So I think hopefully we're going to use that leverage that we have in Congress.
So if you're elected in Arizona's 8th Congressional District, how would you handle this influx of illegal immigrants, given the fact that we're seeing thousands of military-aged men flowing in from countries known for harboring terrorism?
Well, that's exactly right. One of the first things I want to introduce legislation-wise is classifying the drug cartels as a foreign terrorist organization. I mean, these drug cartels, they're getting all of this fentanyl coming in from China, and China's pouring it in and affecting so many of our suburban communities, and it goes all across the country, and it's killing so many young people these days. So that's one of the first things I want to work on. But if you look at the border wall, I mean, the border wall made the most sense, and unfortunately, you saw Democrats put a pause on it. You're looking at what the governor here, Katie Hobbs in Arizona. I mean, you're seeing that the port of entries are closing here, which is quite unusual, right? Where you're having Americans unable to leave the United States, but we're allowing illegal immigrants to come into our country. So we got to get a handle on it. But one of the most important things also is electing President Trump next November. We've seen how difficult it is to work with a Democrat president. So that's one of the key issues that I'm also focused on also with the Senate, because we need to recapture the Senate. And that's why Kari Lake is also running for Senate here in Arizona. So it's really a multi-dimensional, multi-pronged war that we're fighting. But it's going to take a lot of courage right now, but 10 million people in 3 years is unsustainable. I mean, that's bigger than the population of most states. It's unacceptable, and it's putting a drain on all of our resources. So we got to get a lot tougher on it.
And you're obviously sitting in a border state that feels the brunt more than many others between you and, in Arizona and Texas. So right now there appears to be a caravan of illegal migrants approaching the border. What is the feeling like down there, and how would you suggest preventing such a situation in the future as a congressman in Arizona?
Right, and I was just down at the border just a few days ago as well, and the caravans are coming because they're encouraged to come right now. Biden and the Democrats have advertised to the world that they're not going to enforce our laws. So it's not just these poor migrants, as you mentioned earlier. I mean, you're looking at possible terrorists who have infiltrated spies, foreign spies who are coming in. But this is where we have to get a lot tougher with negotiating with Mexico. We saw last week, despicably, Anthony Blinken and Mayorkas go to Mexico. They couldn't even pull a deal together with Mexico. Here Mexico's driving our policy on our border. It's unacceptable. So this is where Congress and the Senate, and especially with the foreign policy committees, they have to have a lot stronger stance with Mexico and actually use the leverage that we have. I mean, Mexico relies on the United States a lot more than we rely on Mexico. And that's what President Trump understood, and that's why he was able to successfully negotiate with Mexico and also build the wall. So that's something we got to get back to. All of these policies that we're talking about, I mean, they were working for the 4 years under President Trump. So it doesn't take rocket science. It requires common sense to go back to the America First values.
Abe Hamad, a congressional candidate in Arizona's 8th District. Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
A major speech coming up for President Biden. This as the president seeks to draw contrast with the former president, President Trump. That's as polls show Biden trailing Trump in key battleground states. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. So if you could tell us, what is the president doing this weekend on the 3rd anniversary of January 6th?
Good evening to you, Steve. So we are expecting to see a major split screen moment this Saturday on the third anniversary of January 6th between former President Trump and President Biden. And President Biden is giving a speech on democracy at Valley Forge, a historic Revolutionary War site near Philadelphia. And the goal here is to try to convince voters that former President Trump poses a historic threat to democracy, one that Biden's campaign says has only grown more dire in the years after 2020. Meanwhile, the White House today saying this about January 6th. Watch.
What happened on January 6th was unprecedented, an attack on our core principles, an attack on our democracy, what we saw.
And the White House tells us that President Biden today also had lunch with a group of historians and scholars about, quote, the ongoing threats to democracy and democratic institutions here in America and around the world. So we are really seeing President Biden's campaign here trying to jumpstart this year's campaign events with the theme about a fight for democracy and Biden versus Trump as we're getting closer and closer to a potential rematch between the two. Steve.
So, Iris, what about former President Trump? What exactly might he be doing on January 6th this year?
So President Trump is holding two campaign events in Iowa this Saturday, of course, as the Iowa caucus is just about a week away. And let's not forget that Trump just weeks ago has also called President Biden a threat to democracy, accusing him of launching politically motivated persecution against Trump himself. So it does remain to be seen how the two leading candidates here in the 2024 race will respond to each other and target each other in their upcoming addresses this Saturday. Steve.
NTD's Iris Tao reporting for us live from the White House. Thank you, Iris. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.